Okay, so let's dive in. We got a ton of questions about something that, well, I think we've all kind of wondered about at some point. Why does Switzerland seem so expensive? You guys sent over a bunch of stuff promising like a real in-depth explanation. So that's what we're going to tackle today. Why Switzerland has that, reputation for being so pricey.
Yeah, it's always interesting to peel back the layers on something like this.
Right. And hopefully uncover some surprising facts along the way. So the stuff you guys shared lays out like 7 core reasons. It's pretty
Oh,
comprehensive.
that's great.
And it all starts with, well, something we all know Switzerland is kind of famous for, those high wages.
Right, and that's a great place to start because it shows how everything is kind of connected. It basically says that Switzerland has some of the highest average salaries in the world. And while that's obviously awesome for the people living and working there, it definitely impacts, well, the cost of just about everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they actually have some pretty crazy comparisons. Like, for example, the average salary for a hairdresser in Switzerland, get this, it's around 55,000 Swiss francs. But then you look at Germany, same job, it's more like 25,000 euros. And in the U.S., well, closer to 30,000 U.S. dollars.
Wow.
It's a big difference, right? And it's not just hairdressers. You see the same thing in retail, like even bakers. So to kind of make this real, let's think about something everyone does, getting a haircut.
Perfect example.
Yeah. So in Zurich, a haircut can easily run you between 60 to 100 Swiss francs.
That's a lot.
It is. But then in Berlin, you'd probably pay like 20 to 30 euros. Or in New York, more like 40 to 70 U.S. dollars.
Mm.
It really shows you the difference those wages make on like an everyday level.
Totally. And it's not just about what you pay the person cutting your hair, right?
Yeah.
I mean, higher wages for employees, well, that also means higher costs for businesses in general, like rent, for example, or what they call social contributions.
Yeah, what are those exactly? I'm not super familiar with that term.
Basically, it's money that both employers and employees pay towards Social Security and welfare programs, stuff like unemployment insurance and pensions. And generally speaking, higher wages equal higher social contributions.
Oh, I see. So it all adds up for the businesses.
Exactly. It makes running a business more expensive and, ultimately those costs, well, they get passed on to us, the consumers, in the form of higher prices. So those high wages, they have this ripple effect across the entire economy.
It's like a chain reaction. Okay, so we've got high wages pushing prices up. What's next on the list?
Well, the next big factor is the strength of the Swiss franc.
Right, the Swiss franc. It's always being talked about as a safe haven currency. What does that even mean? And how does that make things in Switzerland more expensive?
Okay, so a safe haven currency basically means that when, the global economy is a bit shaky, investors tend to flock to the Swiss franc because they see it as stable and, reliable. This high demand drives up its value compared to other currencies.
So it becomes more expensive to buy.
Exactly, and this really impacts anyone visiting Switzerland or, buying anything priced in Swiss francs. The material actually gives a great example. Imagine a hotel room in Zurich that costs, say, 200 to 300 Swiss francs per night. That same amount, if you were in Greece or Spain where the currencies are weaker, well, you could probably get a way fancier room.
So it's like your money doesn't go as far in Switzerland.
Exactly. And then you add in things like fluctuating exchange rates, it can make things even more complicated. Like if the euro or the US dollar weakens against the francs, Switzerland suddenly feels even more expensive for people using those currencies. It's almost like the strong franc acts as a multiplier on the cost differences.
Got it. Okay. High wages, strong currency. What else makes Switzerland so pricey?
Well, the third reason they highlight is the cost of services in Switzerland.
And this probably ties back to the wages, right? I mean, the material contrasts Switzerland with places like Portugal or Poland, where wages are lower, so services are a lot cheaper. But what's interesting about Switzerland is that even jobs that might be considered low skill, they still pay pretty well.
Yeah, that's a key point. Because labor costs are high across the board, the prices for services reflect that. They actually use another great comparison, the hourly rate for a handyman. So in Switzerland, you could be looking at 80 to 150 Swiss francs per hour.
Wow.
Right. But then you compare that to, say, Portugal or the Czech Republic, where it's more like 15 to 30 euros, or even in the US, where it's somewhere between 50 and 100 US dollars, although, of course, it varies a lot depending on where you are.
Right, right. There's a big difference.
It really shows how the value of labor is different in Switzerland. And they give a bunch of other examples, too, like cleaners, taxi rides, babysitters, even just getting your washing machine repaired. All of that's going to be way more expensive in Switzerland.
So it's not just a few things. It's kind of everything. Okay, let's move on to something that probably affects a lot of people's budgets. Housing and rent prices. And the source really focuses on those big Swiss cities.
Yeah, cities like Zurich, Geneva, Basel, Lausanne, they're all facing the same issue. Way more people want to live there than there are places to live. And that, of course, drives up both rent and property prices.
And the numbers really show it. For a 3-room apartment right in the city center of Zurich, you're looking at 2,800 to 3,800 Swiss francs per month in rent. And they compare that to other major European cities like Munich, Vienna, Milan, Lisbon. And you can find similar apartments for so much less in those places.
So why is housing so limited in Switzerland? What's going on there?
Well, they point to a couple of things. First, Switzerland has really strict building regulations. And while that's often to ensure quality and sustainable construction, it can also slow things down.
So fewer new buildings get built. Exactly. And then there's just the reality of Switzerland's geography, right? It's a country of mountains and lakes, which limits how much land is actually available for building. You can't just keep expanding outward like you can in some other countries.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered high wages, the strong currency, expensive services, and high housing costs. What's next?
Food prices, and specifically how Switzerland protects its agricultural industry.
Oh, interesting. This seems like something that would directly impact how much people pay for groceries.
Absolutely. Switzerland has a long history of protecting its farmers and its domestic agriculture. And they do this in a few ways, like imposing tariffs on imported food, setting quotas on how much can be brought in from other countries, and by giving direct subsidies to Swiss farmers.
So they're really trying to keep things local, but how does that affect prices?
Well, it makes food in Switzerland more expensive. I mean, the material actually gives some pretty specific comparisons. Like, a liter of milk in Switzerland might cost you between 1.60 and 2 Swiss francs. But in Germany, it's more like 0.80 to 1.20 euros, and in Italy, it's around 1 euro.
Huh. So even basic stuff like milk is pricier.
Yeah, and it's not just milk. They show the same thing with eggs, bread. It's consistently more expensive in Switzerland than in neighboring countries.
So that protectionist approach, while it helps Swiss farmers and maybe ensures national food security, it does mean that Swiss consumers are paying more at the checkout.
Exactly. And they even mention how lots of Swiss people who live near the border will actually drive to Germany, France, or Italy just to buy their groceries because it's so much cheaper.
Wow, that's pretty telling. So we've talked about wages, currency, services, housing, even food. What about healthcare? How does that factor into the cost of living in Switzerland?
Well, Switzerland is known for having top-notch healthcare, but it's mostly private, although very regulated, which is a pretty big difference from, say, the systems you see in a lot of other European countries or in Canada, which are more socialized or publicly funded.
And that probably makes a difference in how much people pay, right?
Big time. For basic health insurance for an adult, you could be paying anywhere from 300 to 600 Swiss francs every month.
Per month.
Per month. And if you compare that to, say, Germany's public system, where it's more like 250 to 350 euros, or France, where it's about 200 to 300 euros, although a lot of people have extra coverage on top of that, or even the US, which has a private system, and Canada, where it's mostly paid for through taxes. So yeah, those Swiss premiums are pretty high.
It sounds like it. But is it just the premiums?
Oh, no. On top of the monthly premiums, you usually have to pay what's called a deductible, meaning you have to shell out a certain amount of money before your insurance actually starts covering anything. And then on top of that, there's often a 10% copay for a lot of services, even after you've met your deductible. So healthcare in Switzerland can get really expensive really fast.
Yeah, so while the quality might be great, it comes at a price.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered 6 reasons so far. What's the last one?
The last one is about, well, quality, like the cost of maintaining high quality infrastructure and security. And this is where you start to see a more direct link between those high costs and the benefits for people living there.
So it's not just about being expensive. There's a reason for it.
Yeah. The material argues that those high costs are directly related to Switzerland's reputation for, excellence. Their education system is amazing, always ranked among the best in the world. And their public transport, it's clean, it's always on time, it goes everywhere. They also have an incredibly low crime rate, beautiful public spaces, and overall really high quality public services. And all of that takes a lot of investment.
They give an example, right? Like an annual public transportation pass in Zurich costs about 900 Swiss francs.
Right.
And while that might seem like a lot compared to, say, some other European cities, they point out that those cheaper systems, well, they often come with downsides, like maybe they're not as reliable, or the trains and buses don't come as often, or they're just not as well maintained. So in Switzerland, you're basically paying more, but you're getting a better service.
Yeah, and the point is, those things, the efficient infrastructure, the safety, the nice parks and public spaces, it doesn't just happen. It takes constant investment and maintenance. And that costs money. And ultimately, that cost gets factored into the overall cost of living, both directly through things like train tickets and indirectly through taxes and the prices of goods and services.
It's like there's a built-in cost for having that high standard of living.
Exactly.
Okay, so as we wrap things up, it's clear that Switzerland's high cost of living isn't due to just one thing. It's like this complex web of factors all kind of intertwined. We're talking about those high incomes having a broad impact, a relatively small domestic market, lots of regulations, maybe less competition in some areas, and a real commitment to protecting things like their agriculture. It's a lot to consider.
It is. And the takeaway from all of this seems to be that while Switzerland is definitely a costly place to live or visit, a lot of those high prices are actually a reflection of the amazing quality of life, the safety, the reliability, the stability that the country offers. So in a way, those prices are a sign of the things Switzerland prioritizes and does well.
It makes you think about the trade-offs, right? Like when you compare costs of living between different countries,
Yeah.
you also have to factor in the quality of life, the reliability of services, the sense of security. It's about what we as individuals and as a society value most and what price we're willing to pay for those things. It's a lot more than just sticker shock, that's for sure. Thanks for digging into this with us today.